All righty. This is Lenny DellaRocca with the South Florida Poetry Journal, and I am here with Nicole Tallman. We are very grateful. When I say we, I mean SoFloPoJo, South Florida Poetry Journal. We're very grateful to them for partnering with us since 2016, since the journal actually began. So I want to ask you, Nicole, first of all, welcome. And I understand this is your first reading at it's going to be your first reading at Miami Book Fair.
Oh, thank you, Lenny, for taking this time to interview me today, and to Michael in the background, making all the magic happen in Book Fair. Thank you for having me. Actually, this will be my second reading at Book Fair. I did read last year for my first book, Something Kindred, so this will be my second time. Yes.
Okay. So you are actually going to read there in the physical world on, I think you said Sunday, November 19th in Building 8, and that's at 11 a.m.
That is correct.
Okay, so I'm hoping folks will get on out there. If you're going to be at the book fair, please go see Nicole. So you are, in terms of bio, you're a very, very busy lady. You are, of course, a associate editor with South Florida Poetry Journal, SoFloPoJo. You are the poetry ambassador for the Miami-Dade mayor,
Daniela Levine Cava.
Thank you. You are an editor of review editor for Blue Mountain Review, or
interviews editor, yes, for the Blue Mountain Review.
And then you're connected with ELJ Editions, which is that's the Southern Collective, or am I mixing everything up?
There's so much going on. I can understand why it's difficult to navigate. ELJ Editions is a Merge literary journal, and they have a press. So I am the editor of their Redacted Books series, and then my book that's coming out in November is actually through ELJ Editions. That's kind of how we got to know each other. Is through the book, and I'd published a poem with them. Yes.
And that book is
Versace.
Okay. And it's Versace. The name is, of course, a pun, right? Sort of.
Yeah, it's a play on words. I just kind of made up this word one day. I was walking around downtown Miami, and I saw some people with some fake looking Versace clothes. You could just kind of tell when they're fake. And I was like, wow. I said, wow, that looks like some Versace. And one of my friends laughed and said, that's really good. And I said, well, I didn't entirely make it up, because people call fake Gucci products Fucci. I don't know if you've heard that before, but anyway, so yeah. And then I just decided to write a book. I was like, okay, I'm going to write this book called Versace. I don't know what I'm doing. Let's see what happens. It was kind of challenging, I'll have to tell you.
You know, that leads me to the question, just based on what you said, is how you came, you can say, okay, yeah, that'll make a great book, but then getting into it, then you have to write the book, right?
Yeah. It's kind of, I don't necessarily think I have a really structured process to writing books. I think that sometimes I start writing poems and then I see themes coalesce. But then there have been other times where I've decided to do something more intentionally. Poems for the People, which is the other book that I have out, that was in February that I launched. Yes, thank you. That one was an intentional project. I had a conversation with my dad one day. I told him I was the poetry ambassador for Miami-Dade County, and I'd sent him a copy of Something Kindred. He goes, I don't really understand poetry, Nicole, but I support you in what you're doing. And when he said that to me, I thought to myself, a lot of people have a bad relationship from poetry, because in high school they were forced to read things that might not be the most easy to understand, or they were told to approach it from a lens that was kind of intimidating. And so with Poems for the People, I set out specifically to write a book of poems, for the most part, that was accessible and straightforward. And that was
I have the book, and I have to say I really, really enjoyed it. And along the same lines as in Something Kindred, because I have that too, they're short pieces. There's nothing extremely long. And you have this wonderful, I'm going to call it a technique or whatever, that you one line on a page, and then the next page is another one line or a couplet or something. Nevertheless, could you read something from Poems of the People for us? Whichever one you want.
Well, I know that this will probably air. Actually, well, there's no way it's going to air today, but I do have to say that October in particular is kind of a difficult month for me because it's my mother's birthday was on October the 3rd, and she passed away from ovarian cancer. And then our dear friend Maureen Seaton, her birthday is actually today, and she passed away in August. So death and grief are kind of one of my themes. So this poem, it's the first poem in Poems for the People. It's called Poem for the Dead, including my mom. And, now we can add our friend Maureen to this too. So this is for them. Poem for the Dead. Since we'll likely never be together again, anywhere but here, what season were you most alive in? Is there morning or color where you are? Do you have freedom? If so, how are you using it? Would you rather be a bird or an angel? Permanent day or never-ending night? If there are hours, when are your most difficult? Do you know who you were before this? Why or why not? And now that there's fire, are you in heaven or hell? More time or less? Do you still feel happiness? Would you return to Earth, this dream, or anywhere else?
Wonderful. That's really wonderful. I'd like to parse something out of that. And now that there's fire, are you in heaven or hell? Am I correct? Is that the line?
Yes.
Wonderful line. Can you talk about how did that line just come to you, or how did that happen on the page?
Well, I do have to disclose something, and I know Michael's going to cackle at this because he knows I have an obsession with with Alex Dimitrov. And Alex Dimitrov has this poem for the reader. And it is a series of questions for readers that he's never met. And when I read that poem, it really struck me. And I said, I want to write this poem, but for people who are dead because they're no longer with us. So, right, it's another way of not being with a person, whether or not you're never meeting them in person or whether you've met them, but you're never going to see each other again, right? So the poem is after his poem, and he has a line that says, and now that there's fire, but then he has a different question after it. So I said, and now that there's fire, and I took it a different place, which is, are you in heaven or hell? And some people, a lot of people don't believe in heaven or hell. I personally am not a religious person, but this was more of a poetic thing. It just, lines come to me sometimes, and I'm sure as a poet yourself, you experience this. It just comes to you. I just, now that there's heaven or hell, my immediate response was, I know now that there's fire, I don't know why, but hell, right? Hell, fire. And then I just thought, but okay, but heaven, right? Heaven or hell. And I could have taken it farther. I could have said, okay, well, are you somewhere else entirely? Are you nowhere? Do you not exist? But, for the purposes of poetry, it just worked for me, fire and hell, right? And then the opposite of that is what? Heaven, right? So I think these are like, and, a lot of us have these existential questions about where we go after we die. And the idea of being able to communicate with someone who isn't on the same plane of existence is extremely interesting to me. That's another thing I explore a lot with my poetry. I'm sure you noticed that I have a couple of Ouija board poems, and I know well, maybe you aren't anymore, but you and your wife were somewhat into some of these things yourself. So I'm very fascinated with what happens when we leave this particular body. And that's something that I explore in my poetry as well.
Yeah, the idea of riffing off another poet's line, I do that a lot, and a lot of poets do it. And it's just such an interesting way of getting either the beginning of a poem or having something of it in the poem, like you did. And there's this very thin line, this sort of connection between poets and poems in that respect. And I love that, it sort of becomes a thread of the muse, so to speak, where you kind of just pull on that string and then something happens. And then, of course, that happens within the book itself. You'll have, like you mentioned, the Ouija board poems. where you have this thin thread, or sometimes it's not thin, but you have a thread between the poems, as well as having it from other poets that you see. Just like, and we were talking earlier about your other book that's coming out November 11th, Versace, and you were telling me the origin of how you got that name. And if you'll let's put that in here of the new book, the name of it, Versace.
So I was walking down the street with one of my friends, and we were in this particular part of town, and we had seen some people walking around with clothing that looked like it was kind of Versace, but you could tell it wasn't authentic. Just the patterns were off, right? And I think in Miami, there's a lot of pressure. It's a very materialistic city in a lot of ways. I'm not saying everyone who lives here is, but there's a lot of pressure to look a certain way, to have all the designer brands. And these particular people were probably trying to be cool and part of it, but maybe couldn't afford it. So they had these clothes. And I said, wow, that looks like some Versace to me. And my friend started laughing, and he said, that's actually really good. And I said, well, I didn't entirely invent that, because I've heard people say Fucci for fake Gucci, but in that moment, I said, this is kind of a moment of cultural reflection for me. And it's something that I do a lot as a Midwesterner living in Miami. I have a different perspective on what I'm seeing, right? And so I said, it'd be really cool if I had a book called Versace. And what if I used it as a way to sort of kind of gently poke fun of some of the stuff that we see here in Miami, but also use it as, a little bit of cultural satire. But then, there are ways of comparing place in general, right? Where we grow up and how that influences what we're seeing in front of us. And I think that my perspective is, as a non-Hispanic woman living in Miami, I'm always othered in a lot of ways. People, where are you from? It's gotten a little bit better since I've been here longer. But when I first got here, people they just didn't know what to do with me. They could tell right away I wasn't from here from the way that I talk. Obviously, I have a Midwestern accent, kind of nasal through my nose, and just the way that I would dress. And so I thought to myself, I haven't really tackled Miami as a topic because I'm a little bit nervous. We have to be careful in these political times too, right? And we don't want to appear insensitive. But I think there are a lot of things to look at when you're living at a city like this, especially as a woman who's aging. And we all know aging isn't always something that people embrace. It's very hard, I think, aging in general, but I think it's especially hard as a woman, and it's especially hard living in a city like Miami where people are so damn beautiful, and having to compete with that constantly, right? And Denise Duhamel was one of the authors who blurbed my book along with Maureen. And one of the things that she picked up on right away, she was obviously everybody knows Kinky, right? Denise's book, sure. The Barbie book, right? Sure. I read a poem in Versace called Dear Barbie. And it talks about the fact that Barbie never ages. I mean, how old is Barbie, Lenny? She's old, right?
Yeah.
Right.
As old. No, I'll leave it at that. I was going to say something, but no, I don't want to get into old, because look at me, but yeah.
Well, okay, I shouldn't say she's comparatively old, but she sure. Has not a single wrinkle. She has no
gray. Barbie,
right? She doesn't age, and so that was another thing that I felt like Miami is this real Barbie in a way. She doesn't age. You see these women who are, in their 60s, 70s. I'm not exaggerating. I was walking down the street yesterday from, because I work at Government Center, because we went to lunch together. And this woman was standing in front of me, and I could tell she had to have been, I think, in her early 70s. And she was wearing these sexy stilettos, her hair, her outfit. I was like, my God, like, I don't have that energy. Okay. I'm not even close to being that age yet, but she had this certain swagger and presence and elegance about her. And that to me is very much Miami. But as a Midwesterner, we're kind of taught to be frugal. We're taught to not necessarily put so much emphasis on the materialism. So I'm always straddling this line between what people expect me to be and how I was raised. There's a lot of identity in this book. And I use it also as a way to talk about some of the political issues that we have here in Florida. There's a poem called The Moon is Gay. And I used it as a platform to talk about being able, the title is "The Moon is Gay," aka "Say Gay," and I think you know where I'm going with this. It was
Absolutely.
an opportunity to be able to talk out against this anti-LGBTQ legislation that we're seeing coming out of the state level, not so much locally here in Miami-Dade because we have a pretty progressive community, but some of this that's coming down from the state is very concerning, the book bans and all of these other things. So I use this book as a platform to talk about a lot of things that I've shied away from in the past, but I felt like it was time.
And that's a good segue into let's read a poem from Versace. And will you read The Moon is Gay?
Let me see if I can pull that one up, because I
know it's not out until November 11th.
Yeah. Give me 1 second here. I have it. I'm just trying to pull up you'd think I would have had it queued up, but life doesn't always work that way. Here it is. Okay, this is called The Moon is Gay, aka Say Gay. It's June and the moon is looking even gayer tonight. She's in Gemini, shining her super social, waxing crescent moon face. I was born under a crescent moon. Yes, I was also born gay. That really isn't debatable. There is no rainbow moon, but there should be. Rainbow Bright would live there, along with her best twink friend Sprite. They would wake every night, singing, "Sunbeams sparkle and shine, you'll always be a friend of mine." 80s gay kids will remember that theme song line. When I told my mother I was gay, she said, "But you were a cheerleader." I love that gay movie with Natasha Lyonne. Have you seen it? Watch it tonight if you haven't, and then go outside and enjoy the gay moon. Or wait until the next full moon. Maybe you'll catch a gay moonbow. So you notice I said gay a lot in that poem, right? And that was the intent. Sure. How many times can I say gay in a poem without hitting someone over the head with it? That was my task there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It worked well. It did its job, and it did it quite nicely. So you mentioned earlier that you're originally from Michigan, and now you're in. How long have you been in Miami now?
Well, I've been in South Florida since 2006. I first moved to the Boca area when my job relocated me, and then I moved to Fort Lauderdale and spent some time there, and then I moved officially to Miami between 2010 and 2011. So it's been a while.
Yeah. So you've been in Florida almost 20 years. Almost.
Yes.
Yeah. But the difference between Michigan, the Midwest, and South Florida, we were talking, or you mentioned something to that about that earlier. How do you are you starting to feel like you're a Floridian now, or you still got that Michigan in you? I think. Go ahead.
I'm thinking about it. I think that the thing that holds me back the most about saying I feel Floridian is that I identify time so much by seasons. And when you live in Miami, there's one season, right? It's summer. And so I love Miami. Do not get me wrong. I love South Florida, but in my heart of hearts, I think I'm Michigan. And I think it's just because I grew up with that changing of the seasons, and so much is connected for me in that moment. But I straddle that line by going back and forth from Miami to Michigan. I make it a point to go at least 4 times a year and to try to get a little bit of each of the seasons, because otherwise I get very depressed. It's kind of like a seasonal affective disorder, but most people get it in the wintertime in Michigan. I get it. I think if I don't have that change in the seasons, the scent of the leaves and the smoke that comes out in the fall with the change, how there's that crisp smell in the air. And then in the wintertime, when you get that first snowfall, and then in the spring, when everything comes alive again, to me, it's important. So I guess I don't want to box myself in and say I'm pure Michigan, right? But I do feel very rooted in Michigan, and I feel like Miami has been a gracious host to me. And I'm hoping she keeps me longer. I really do. I really am enjoying my time here. but it's very difficult for me to feel like I belong because I'm just so different here. I mean, you're not from Florida, are you, Lenny, originally?
No, but I've been here since 1966, since I'm 12.
Oh, 12. Oh,
While yeah, I'm from Long Island, New York,
right.
but being down here since the 60s, I mean, I really am a Floridian. I grew up down here.
I
So,
see.
you know, I mean, there might be a little bit of New York in me, but mainly I'm from Florida. Um, let's talk a little bit about the poets who you admire, who you love to read, and maybe go back to when it's time to pick up a collection and read, and maybe reread. Who are some of the poets you love to read?
Well, the poets that influenced me early in my life are Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton and Emily Dickinson. One of the first books I ever received was this book. It was like a Hallmark edition of a book called Judge Tenderly of Me that was on the bookshelf. And my mother didn't own a lot of poetry, but she had that book. And so it struck me that she had that. So I think I got a little bit of that early Emily Dickinson goth kind of thing going as an influence. And then in college was when I was really exposed to Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton. They didn't really teach us that so much in high school. It was more, your traditional Shakespearean sonnet type of thing. But those are of the dead poets. Those I think are my greatest influences. I'd say those three. I also love Lucille Clifton. I find her fascinating. She is such an amazing poet. um of the living poets, I'm always careful with this because I don't ever want to leave anyone out, but I'll tell you the books I turn to the most recently have been, I'm going to go recent because then that way I'm hoping I don't offend people. I have read Diane Seuss's Frank Sonnets a zillion times. She's a Michigan poet out of Kalamazoo, which is only 20 miles from where I grew up, so I feel a really strong connection to her and her work. I've read recently 100 Lovers by Richie Hoffman. That is an amazingly beautiful, spare, but super luxurious, gorgeous book. I love how Richie explains things so concisely but beautifully. He's got an amazing edge about him. We all know I love Alex Dimitrov, and Love and Other Poems is up there. I love Obit by Victoria Chang. It was an honor to be able to talk to her last year about her book, The Trees Witness Everything. But Obit is actually, I'd say, my favorite of Victoria Chang's books. I love The Tradition by Jericho Brown is a beautiful book as well. And Eduardo Corral, his book, Guillotine, is phenomenal if you
Yeah,
hadn't read it. And of course, we have our amazing South Florida poets. I've read every single book by Maureen Seton. I adore her. I love her. I had the honor of editing her last book while she was with us, The Sky is an Elephant. If you have not read that book, it is such a beautiful, beautiful book. A book by a poet, I think, in her most highest accomplished state. After you've been publishing for 3 decades, that book it's a masterpiece to me. And I'm not just saying that because I edited it. I read it, and I'm so blown away by the talent in
yeah,
that book. It is gorgeous.
yeah. She was a great poet and a great friend, a fierce friend. She was wonderful. Um, So I want to ask you if you want to talk more about anything that we might not. I don't want to go into the cliche of, well, do you write in the morning? Do you write at night? And what inspires you to write? But that's great. That's fine. But is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to talk about, whether it's about the books or about anything else?
I would just encourage people to, if you have poems I edit along with some amazing people for South Florida Poetry Journal. And I do want to take a minute to really give some credit to South Florida Poetry Journal, because I have to say, I feel like a lot of where I am today is because of you and the journal. You gave me an opportunity. You really did, that I didn't previously had. I hadn't started publishing my poems until 2020, even though I'd been writing for years, and I submitted something, and it wasn't accepted at the time because there are a lot of people on the journal who read, but you took the time to reach out to me. And it was very touching to me, Lenny, that you took that time to say to me, hey, I really liked your poem, and would you want to read for the journal? Not a lot of people take the time to do that. So I just really want to give credit to South Florida Poetry Journal and the amazing work that you and the team do. And I want to remind people that submissions are free all year round. We read all the time. So please submit to the journal if you can. And also I do edit for the Blue Mountain Review. So if you're listening and you're a poet and you have something that you want to submit, you can submit there as well. And I do, as Lenny said, I am an editor for the Redacted book series, which is a new book series out of ELJ Editions. We put out calls in May of each year, and I pick 2 books every year so that I can really give them my time and attention. I'll be publishing a book by Anton Yakovlev, and that will come out in May. And then I'm going to do another one by Ashley Elizabeth, a poet, that's going to come out in August. And so you can be on the lookout for those. And I do also host at the main library downtown. If you're listening and you're local, the first Thursday of every month at noon, we do a poetry and jazz series. I host that with the Biscayne poet Oscar Fuentes. It's a good time. You can come down and get to hear some really good live music and poetry from some of our local poets. And I also host, usually the first Thursday of each month at 7 p.m., a series from ELJ Editions called the Be Well Reading Series. And I host 3 poets. And in November, actually November the 3rd, we're going to do a Friday this time for scheduling reasons. I have the honor of hosting Dorothea Lasky along with Jessica Coelho and Adam O. Davis, and we're going to do a horror poetry focus. So a little post-Halloween fun. They have some really beautiful books coming out. So if you're available, you could come join us online for that. So yeah, I've given my pitch, I think, of everything I do except for my poetry ambassadorship, right?
Yeah, go ahead, tell us about that.
Well, I was just going to say that I'm working with Richard Blanco right now on the Miami's Favorite Poems project. And if you are a poet with Miami ties, you don't necessarily have to live in Miami, but if you have a tie to Miami, you can go online to miamidade.gov/poetry. We have a poetry page in government now. How cool is that? And you can submit your favorite poem, and we're going to build an online archive to kind of unite our community in poetry. How cool is that?
That's
so yeah,
fantastic.
that's the end of my pitching. I think, yeah, but
well, you're wearing so many hats. It's just amazing that you can juggle so many dishes. I'll kind of mix metaphors there, but you're just everywhere. You got your fingers in so many pies. There's another one. But I just think it's amazing, and you're doing so well, and I'm really, really glad to see it. And I love your work, and I love what you're doing. And I'm glad you'll be reading at the book fair come November 19th at 11 o'clock on Sunday in Building 8. I hope anybody in the Miami area gets down there to see you and others. There's a lot of great things going on at the fair. I mean, the book fair has been around for a long time now, and they've got such wonderful things going on. In any case, I thank you so much, Nicole, for coming on with this, and I hope a lot of folks come out to see you, and we'll see you around there. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Lenny. Have a great day.
Okay.